Hello internet world and welcome to a new episode of Business Time. This particular series has been so popular with you guys and girls. I just want to thank you for all of your positive feedback and comments. This particular episode of Business Time is actually covering the subject of when your clients or customers don't pay. Either they don't pay on time or they don't pay you at all. And this particular episode also must be credited to one of the viewers, because in a previous episode somebody asked me to cover this very subject matter, and that's what makes this particular series extra special. Because of your comments and questions, I can cover those in future videos as well. So anyway, let's get on to the topic of what to do if clients don't pay you for your work. That could be services or products. And the first particular tip I want to give you is how to minimize this happening. So sort of how to prevent it happening as much as you can before you actually send out the invoice. So when you're talking to a customer or client, it's really important to set out clear terms and conditions before starting the work. So either before providing the services or before providing the products. Very important to do this. So whether that's in writing via the postal system or more often than not nowadays via email, I would certainly avoid using the likes of direct messaging on platforms like Facebook and Twitter, etc. Always revert to a more professional email with your prospective clients. When you've agreed these terms and conditions via email, and I always have these pre-typed in like a script type format or a template, then make sure that these are copied and pasted across onto the invoice as well. If you want to be paid within a certain amount of time, then do declare these in your terms and conditions. If you have certain services that you're offering and there is room for maybe things to go wrong, for example, when I'm doing a live broadcast, it could happen that the live broadcast fails for some reason. We get bugs in YouTube, we get bugs in the bandwidth for the videos going out. So what if this happens when I'm delivering a live broadcast for a client? So this, again, something like that has to be built into the terms and conditions. If you're providing a service and you've got to turn up on time, then you need to build in something for what if you get delayed through no fault of your own. Maybe there's a traffic jam or a cancelled train. What happens if you're late to deliver that service? You need to put these sort of things in place, not only to protect you, but also to protect your client, and also so that it's clear as to what their expectations are. Another really good thing to use is a service for invoicing, something like QuickBooks or FreshBooks. There are plenty of services online, so that you can send out an electronic invoice and then you haven't got to do the chasing. These services will, more often than not, if you set them up correctly, will actually remind your client to pay an invoice on time. They might even allow you to offer an incentive, perhaps a 5% discount if they pay early. And then also you have to tell them what's going to happen if they pay late. So just be very clear before any service actually takes place. So that's a really good tip for you. Now, before I move on to tip number 2, let's take a look inside the live chat. This is a live broadcast, of course, and as always, a big hello to the first 4 of you in the live chat. So big hello to Dean, Patrick, Harvinder and Joshua. Thank you very much for tuning in. I'll take some questions and comments a little bit later during this broadcast. But let's move on to the next tip, is steps to take for late payers. So what if your client is indeed late in paying you? Well, I implement, this is me personally, during my business career, very early on, I used to be so lenient, and things used to be paid late, maybe a couple of weeks, a month late, and then it was stretched to a couple of months and then 3 months. And that is no way to run a business. It's not fun chasing payments. So what I do is I implement a 3-strike policy. So number 1, I remind the client 3 days before the payment is due to actually take a look at the invoice. You know, they need to pay this in on time. And then strike number 2 is to push again when the invoice is 7 days late. So if they haven't paid 7 days after the due date, then they get a little bit more stern email, a little bit more of a sort of forthcoming reminder, you really need to get this paid because it is now late. And then strike number 3 is to inform them of the fees and action you're going to take after it's 14 days late. So I never let my invoices go more than 14 days beyond the payment date. And what sort of action you could take? Well, let's cover that in tip number 3. And this is the steps to take for non-payers. So if your client definitely hasn't paid, they haven't responded to your reminder emails or the automatic reminders that are going out from the various invoicing services that you might use, then you need to actually email them a notice of debt recovery action. It's a good idea when you go to this stage to actually, as well as sending them an email, which is perfectly acceptable legality wise, and an email, the time and date that it's sent is the time that you can record as to having informed your client. But I still think it's a good idea to put this sort of notice of debt recovery in the post as well. I would send it by like a signed for registered postal service, so you get a signature at the other end to acknowledge that it's actually been received. And then give a final notice with the details of any additional fees. So this is something going back to the very first tip, when you set out the clear terms and conditions before starting, is to say when you expect to get paid and then what additional fees or penalties they have to actually pay if they don't settle the invoice on time. So this comes all the way forwards to this final tip, which is to give the final notice of those fees, sort of penalties that you set out in your initial terms and conditions. And then the very final tip, this is one that I hate doing, and thankfully I've only ever had to do this once in my whole business career, and that is to use a debt recovery service. This is a last resort, of course, and you can do this in a few ways in the UK. It might differ between country to country, but in the UK we can go through a small claims court or small claims procedure. This is all done online now. You pay a small fee and then notices are sent out to the client that they haven't paid on time. They're going to have to pay additional fees because you started this small claims procedure. And then the other way is also to use a debt collection service. So there are plenty of businesses that you can actually pay for their services to recover the debt for you. That last one is a last resort, and as I say, thankfully I've only ever had to use that once in my 25 plus years of being self-employed. So that is pretty much it of what you can do when clients don't pay. But before we wind up this particular broadcast, let's have a look inside the live chat. Joshua Yates says, oh wow, maybe payment before services next time. Well, that's a very good thing. This is something where you can ask for payment up front, and this is something you can set out in tip number 1, which is to set out clear terms and conditions before starting. If I'm working with a new client, or if you're working with a new client, I would strongly suggest that if you've never done any work for them before, then either ask for payment up front and tell them that after this initial job, if they rebook further services down the line, then you're happy to invoice them on 14-day or 30-day terms. What I mean by 14 or 30-day terms is you get paid 14 or 30 days after you've invoiced them. But say that you need payment up front for the first one, or if it's a big job, then and there's a lot of money involved, then you could maybe ask for a deposit. So 20% deposit before starting the work, balance upon completion of the work. Or if it's an extremely large contract and you're doing continual work for them with this big payday at the end, you could ask them for staged payments. So maybe you're offering a service over a period of 3 months, so you could ask for a 25% deposit and then the remaining 25% at the end of each month. So at the end of month 1 you get another 25% payment, end of month 2 another 25%, and then a balancing payment at the end of completing the work. So there are lots of things that you can set out in these initial terms and conditions. Dean Jonathan Neal says, I work for my dad's locksmith company, and in our town we pretty much do everyone, so we're quite lucky and business is great. We have all the estate agents give us work and they are the biggest pain. If they're the biggest pain in paying, then you need to set out those clear terms and conditions. So if you're going to do the work for them, make it easy on yourself. Maybe start using an invoicing service. Maybe offer that incentive. So if you're chasing payments all the time, maybe offer a small discount for payment either early or on time. And Dean's also come in with saying that they use Invoice to Go for their invoicing, so another possible invoicing service that you can use. And there are plenty of invoicing services around. If you find a good one that does this automatic scheduling of reminders, then that can save you chasing. It's the worst thing. I prefer creating. I don't like doing accounts or invoicing. I just like creating and then getting paid for the services, obviously sort of the end goal as well, because we all need to make money. Supreme Leader Snoke says, would you like to be my business partner? I would like to start a chain of lemonade stands. I know I'm smiling because that's a really good offer, and lemonade stands, especially in the summer, don't shun them. It is a good business model, and many a business has been started on that sort of premise as well, which is starting off very small, selling locally and then expanding. Even something as big as McDonald's was started, of course, with that one single restaurant. A really good story. In fact, I watched The Founder about how McDonald's started and how it progressed through to being this sort of franchise chain. And it's a fantastic story. I would recommend you watch The Founder. It's a very, very good movie. So anyway, that is it for this week's Business Time. So let's just recap. When clients don't pay, you can minimise this happening by setting out clear terms and conditions. There are various steps you can take for late payers. I operate the 3-strike rule, so I remind them at various stages after late payment. And then steps you can take for non-payers, so you can email them a notice of debt recovery action. That normally does the trick. Once they know you're taking this seriously, they normally pay. And then, of course, last resort is a small claims court procedure or using a debt recovery service. So that is it for this particular episode of Business Time. If you've got any comments or questions or suggestions for topics for future episodes of this series, then please do drop me a comment below. If you've enjoyed this video, hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in another one very soon.